Hi everyone, my name is Rosie Masui. I am the Harmful Species Program Coordinator at the Kachemak Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve System. And this is presentation 1 for your guys' community monitoring virtual training this year. So typically for harmful algal bloom community monitors, we like to get together in the spring and do an in-person training where we talk about what we saw last summer. We walk through our sampling plans for this upcoming season, some great presentations from a few of our partners. But with our current situation, because of coronavirus, we are doing everything virtually this year. So there will be this presentation as well as a presentation by Stephen Baird, who works at the Research Reserve as our research coordinator. He'll be doing a presentation on water quality. There'll be a presentation from Michael Booz, who works at the Department of Fish and Game in Homer for sport fish, and he'll be discussing the razor clams. And then lastly, there will be a presentation by Dominic Condolero, who works at NOAA's Kasutsna Bay Lab. His presentation will be on HAB monitoring and updates on HAB research, including the research project that is looking at harmful algal bloom toxins in the food web. So those presentations will be posted to our YouTube page on a specific playlist that I've shared with you guys. Today, I am just going to walk through kind of an overview of what our program is for some of you folks who are new. I'll be discussing what we saw last year in our sampling, and then I'll walk through what our sampling plans are for this upcoming season, because things are kind of changing quite rapidly, but we're trying to move forward, especially now that we've spotted the spring bloom. All right, thanks you guys. So what is the reserves program? Just real quickly, I'd like to do an overview of it. Our monitoring program is primarily looking at phytoplankton, but we also do a little bit of shellfish sampling to look for harmful algal bloom phytoplankton species and potentially detect their toxins in shellfish. The shellfish that we toxin test are all wild. So wild shellfish in the state of Alaska are not regulated. They are harvested at your own risk, whereas commercial shellfish is regulated and tested for toxins by the Department of Environmental Conservation. Our program is funded through a state wildlife grant. So this is federal dollars that are designated by the Department of Fish and Game. Our program has been going on for the past 14 years now. So we're able to kind of look at some of these different long-term trends that we've seen. We participate in the Alaska Harmful Algal Bloom Network, which is taking a statewide approach to research, monitoring, event response, and education as well. And that makes up our community monitoring program. How are we monitoring? So we're doing a really, really simple 3-minute phytoplankton tow that's done in the top meter of the water. You do this phytoplankton tow, and what you end up with is that bottle that's tied on or screwed on at the end comes up with a concentrated sample that is then sent to us for analysis. We also have a few of our community monitors who are looking through the samples on their own as well, and then sending us in data sheets. So we monitor throughout South Central Alaska. After the summer of 2015, when there were a few different oyster farms that were shut down because of some of the different harmful algal bloom related toxic events that were happening, their oysters were being tested by DEC and they were coming back above the regulatory limit. This led to our program expanding and there being a larger need for us to be available to help support monitors throughout South Central Alaska. So like you can see on the map, these are some of the general ideas of locations where we have our monitors. You can see the majority is still based in Kachemak Bay, but we also work with monitors outside of Kachemak Bay now. So in Lower Cook Inlet, we're working with commercial fishermen. In Resurrection Bay, we're working with folks at the Sea Life Center. And then in Resurrection Bay and Prince William Sound, we're working with 2 different aquaculture associations. We work with a real diverse group of folks who are interested in harmful algal blooms for a variety of reasons, potentially because they could be impacting recreational or subsistence harvest, impacting people's businesses like oyster farmers or ecotourism lodges. And then we also partner with a few different agencies. These are the 3 concerning harmful algal blooms that we keep track of. The first one, Alexandrium, is kind of the poster child for harmful algal blooms and toxic shellfish in the state of Alaska. It can lead to paralytic shellfish poisoning. Paralytic shellfish poisoning causes a lot of issues and has a long-term history in the state and can be fatal. If you're curious about the symptoms or want to know more about any of these species, we have those resources available on our website. Next is Pseudonychia. So this is a species that sometimes does and sometimes does not produce domoic acid, which is the toxin that can be accumulated in shellfish and can lead to amnesic shellfish poisoning. This can also be fatal, and this species has a history, especially up and down the West Coast, of creating a lot of problems and leading to a lot of impacts like closing commercial crab fisheries and also leading to marine mammal mortality events. The last one is Dinophysis. So Dinophysis is a species that produces okadaic acid, which can lead to diuretic shellfish poisoning. Diuretic shellfish poisoning has yet to be fatal, but the reason we keep track of this one is because a lot of folks who are our community monitors are harvesting shellfish and eating it at remote locations where they might not have access to facilities or be in close range of a hospital. Like this one says, diuretic shellfish poisoning, it leads to really, really bad food poisoning. And this really could potentially be dangerous in a situation if folks didn't have access to those facilities. We also are keeping track of a few other species that can lead to things like fish die-off events. And we keep track of species that are also really great food sources for our different bivalves. So our program's a little bit different from other programs in the sense that we're not just keeping track of these poster child harmful algal bloom species, but also all of the species. I also like to include this for folks who are new, just to kind of clarify our role at the Ketchikan Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. So our goal is really to try to provide information to our community monitors and to our larger community throughout South Central Alaska about the current status of risks from harmful algal blooms and whether or not shellfish have been accumulating these toxins. It is really not our role, though, to be telling anybody if they should or should not be eating wild shellfish. If it comes to something like our shellfish samples are coming back above the regulatory limit, that's when we partner with the Department of Health and Social Services, Public Health, to deliver and develop things like public service announcements to warn people of these risks. But since we are at the National Estuarine Research Reserve, that's not our role to specifically tell folks that. So what happened last summer? Last summer was pretty interesting and exciting, especially after what we'd seen in the summer of 2018. In the summer of 2018, we'd seen really low abundances of phytoplankton throughout the summer. We weren't seeing those really large blooms like we like to see throughout the season, and we weren't sure why. But in 2019, we were actually seeing those large blooms again, which was really great. We were seeing all of those concerning harmful algal bloom species, like I mentioned earlier, throughout the season, yet none of our shellfish sampling showed any shellfish above the regulatory limit. So we did some shellfish sampling with mussel cages in the Homer Harbor, Gusitsna Bay, and at Chinaboo. And then we also were partnering with Fish and Game in Lower Cook Inlet to collect razor clams. None of those samples came back at concerning levels above the regulatory limit. We also were partnering with the communities of Nanwalek and Port Graham to develop community-specific public service announcements, or PSAs. The need to do this came about when we were hearing from those communities and from some of our agency partners that community members were traveling through Lower Cook Inlet to harvest razor clams and to harvest wild shellfish. We were immediately pretty concerned because although we try to keep up and do shellfish toxin testing when we can, we definitely have limitations when it comes to funding on how many samples we're able to send in for toxin analysis and from what areas. So we wanted to make sure that we put out a public service announcement that provides some information on the potential symptoms that folks might experience if they'd eaten toxic shellfish, and then had locally appropriate resources that if they started to experience any of those symptoms after consuming shellfish, that they would have someone who would respond. The public service announcements that we typically produce with the Department of Health and Social Services are designed for folks that are on the road system. And so when you call 911 in Homer, that means something different than if you call 911 in one of these communities. So we're really excited to develop this community-specific PSA in partnership with these two communities. We also really had some help from NOAA and then also from Homer local division of public health. We were also able to develop and deliver workshops and trainings related to harmful algal blooms this past year. So we did one in the fall where we got together a large group of cross-sector community members in the greater Kachemak Bay area. So there were folks there from public health, from Homer Medical, from the community of Port Graham, from NOAA, from Fish and Wildlife, quite a few folks from different groups that came together to talk about harmful algal blooms, their concerns around harmful algal blooms, to introduce folks to one another to see who's doing what, and to discuss how we could improve our communication chains to make sure that if a harmful algal bloom toxic event was happening, that we would be able to connect folks with each other so that people had the right information. Another training that we did as well was this winter. So we partnered with folks at NOAA, the Office of Coastal Management, to develop a risk communication training that previously had been developed discussing things like floods in the lower 48, but we worked to develop this so that it was Alaska and harmful algal bloom specific to talk about how to properly talk about those risks with different community members. We provided this training in Anchorage to some of the Alaska Harmful Algal Bloom Network partners, all the way from Southeast Alaska through the Arctic. If you have questions about the workshop or the training, please feel free to reach out. All right, so moving forward with this summer, things are definitely going to look a little bit different, especially this spring, but we're still very optimistic about being able to collect samples and give out results to folks. So currently, the Research Reserve staff are working remotely. None of our staff is able to regularly be in and work at the office with the current UAA guidelines because of the coronavirus. Because of this, it means that all field work that the reserve typically would be doing is put on. The university has just developed a research exemption application so that different research projects can apply to see if they can do some of their field work, which we have submitted for this program, but we are currently waiting to hear back on whether or not we've been approved. Hopefully we should hear back sometime in May. So because of that, our sampling plans and monitoring plans for the summer have been adjusted a little bit. You can see that asterisk at the beginning that all these are subject to changes, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have been impacted by this, but things have been changing really quickly. So hopefully we'll be able to get some field work done, but we're just kind of waiting for that field work exemption to come through. We will be resupplying our monitors so that they can get going on sampling, and we'll be doing this because we are allowed to have some visitation to our office where we can put together some of our kits to resupply our monitors. I will be connecting with monitors on an individual basis so that they're able to have a scheduled time to come pick up some of those materials in a way where they won't be interacting with other monitors or won't be asked to have any face-to-face contact with us. We also will be having an adjusted sampling schedule in the sense that for us, right now our field work is on hold, so we won't be able to really get out and do as much sampling as we typically would like. We typically start our phytoplankton updates so that they are being done on a weekly basis in May. For now, until we get those fieldwork approvals, we are going to be doing this on a bi-weekly basis, so once every other week. And this is just so we can help support our monitors, we can help respect the CDC recommended guidelines, and so that we're able to send out these updates when we actually have a good amount of information to share with you guys. Our partner projects that we usually participate with during the field season is Department of Fish and Game, we usually partner with them to provide some support for their razor clam surveys. And we also partner with the Seldovia Village Tribe to do the Coastal Observation and Seabird Survey Team Beach Bird Surveys. For right now, since we're not allowed to do field work, our participation for these events is on hold. But we're optimistic that hopefully sometime throughout the summer, we'll be able to get back going. So as I've mentioned, we're not able to do field work, and because of that, our shellfish sampling is on hold until that changes. But that does not mean that we cannot help coordinate getting shellfish samples tested through the Department of Environmental Conservation's Environmental Health Lab in Anchorage. If you are concerned about the toxin levels in shellfish and you would like to get shellfish tested, please reach out to us. We can help coordinate getting those samples to the lab and help pay for those samples as well. We will still have the same 2 sample drop-off locations that we have had for the past few seasons. So one is on the back of Mako's and the other one is right on the railing towards our office. If you are planning on dropping off a sample at either of these locations, please reach out and send myself or Jasmine Maurer an email to give us a heads up that we can expect to find samples there. We will be continuing to partner with the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services to develop public service announcements as we've done in the past. Even though we won't be collecting our own shellfish samples, if we are helping to coordinate shellfish samples and those come back above the regulatory limit, we'll be working to help spread the word and share and develop these public service announcements. So lastly, just to mention again that we will be doing these virtual office hours this Thursday, April 30th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So if you have any questions, please call me at that number listed. If you're a current community monitor, I would love to talk to you about what certain needs you have for refilling your kit, for doing the phytoplankton sampling. Or if you have questions about anything else in our program, I will be available for those hours. So thank you guys. We really appreciate all of our community monitors' commitment to this program and support for sampling. We know this is going to be a bit of a different year, but we really want to be able to provide some of the same information that we always have been able to. We're optimistic that we'll be getting that fieldwork application approved, but still unclear for moving forward. So as always, please reach out if you have any questions. My phone number is right there, and we hope that everyone is doing well. Thanks, you guys.